What's your own sense on the overall picture as far as soft commodities is concerned? Because it's very divergent.
Well, that's right. And, in the past, we would have looked at typical supply and demand. How much are we producing around the world? How much incomes are growing? So how much more import demand there's going to be? But now there's so much politics involved in the global grain trade or agricultural trade more broadly. What's becoming more important than typical supply and demand factors is what's going to happen on the political front. What tariffs are going to get put in place, and how is that going to impact where the flow of commodities goes around the world?
Yeah, but for example, I mean, what we're seeing with orange juice futures or for soybean, corn, wheat, I mean, what's the outlook really?
Well, if we look at wheat markets, that's been a really interesting one over the last few years. When Russia invaded Ukraine initially, wheat prices globally doubled to the highest on record. And ever since, we've seen this roller coaster of higher and lower prices. But overall, they have been moving lower. And one of the main reasons has been that despite the war ongoing, both Russia and Ukraine have been producing decently sized crops. Russia produced 2 record crops since the war in Ukraine began. And due to having physically more wheat on hand in Russia and the need for foreign currency, both from Russia and from Ukraine, has meant that they've been sending more and more into international markets. So due to the sanctions, there's only so many ways that Russia can get foreign currency. One of the ways is to export agricultural commodities, which aren't sanctioned. And from the perspective of Ukraine, they also need foreign currency due to the war. So you've seen large crops in Russia, and because of that, a lot of exports coming out. And also from Ukraine, surprisingly, considering the war is ongoing, they've been producing a phenomenal amount. So we've seen large export flows from the Black Sea. Now, moving forward, the real question is what's going to happen to those export flows? The Russian wheat crop is possibly being reduced this year. They had dry conditions heading into planting, some issues while the crops were dormant. And now, as we head out of dormancy in March and April, the period everyone's really watching for, everyone's trying to figure out how much of an impact on Russian crops is there going to be this year. And on the Ukraine side, what's going to happen with the war in Ukraine? Is there going to be a peace deal reached? So whether it's due to politics or due to the weather, how much exports can we get from the Black Sea? That'll determine where prices head this year for wheat. And of course, it'll impact other commodity markets like corn as well.
Okay, what's your biggest bet in soft commodities right now, Dennis?
Well, if we do see issues with the Russian crop, that will probably be supportive of global wheat prices. So that's really what everyone is watching for right now. There doesn't seem to be much of a risk premium for reduced exports out of, say, Ukraine due to the war. There's been a lot of export despite the war. They've been sending it through those deep sea Odessa ports. So if the peace deal negotiations fall apart entirely, if there's a reduction in funding for Ukraine from the US, and as a result, we see a reduced ability by Ukraine to defend those deep sea ocean ports, where over 80% of its wheat comes from, then we could see some upside. So that's the key things to watch that could cause push prices to go higher for wheat. And for example, if we go over to soybeans, one of the key factors to watch is what happens to U.S. biofuel policy. So there's a lot of uncertainty now with the Trump administration. Are they going to go ahead with the 45Z tax credit? Right now, there's just not enough certainty for prices to move higher. But that's another key factor to watch. And the tariffs, of course.